Good morning, survivors. Or afternoon. Or night. Honestly, time's just another casualty these days, isn't it? If you're listening to this broadcast, congratulations. You're one of the lucky ones. Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. This is Radio Frostbite. Still standing, still speaking, still trying to make sense of the world we've been left with. Not that there's much world left to make sense of. You've probably heard the stories, but in case you've been living under a rock, literally in some cases, here's the recap. It started with a flash, a light so bright it turned night into day and day into something we don't have a word for. Nuclear bombs, the kind we always feared but never really believed we'd see. The kind that rewrite the rules of life, death, and everything in between. The explosion itself was bad enough, but it wasn't the main event. No, the real show started when the ash clouds rolled in, smothering the sky and choking the sun. Temperatures plummeted faster than anyone could imagine. One day, it was winter coats and scarves. The next, it was survival gear, if you were lucky enough to have it. If not, well, the cold doesn't discriminate. It claims everyone equally. The world didn't just freeze. It stopped. No movement, no sound, no life. Just the endless expanse of white, stretching out to every horizon. Snowstorms swallowed cities whole, turning them into ghostly silhouettes of what they once were. Roads disappeared, rivers froze solid, and the air itself turned hostile. At these temperatures, even breathing feels like a challenge. Every inhale stings, every exhale crystallizes. It's like the cold isn't just around us, it's inside us. The silence is the worst part. Before all this, cities were alive with noise. Car horns, laughter, music spilling out of open windows. Now, there's nothing. Just the wind screaming like it's mourning the world we've lost. Sometimes I think I can hear other things in the wind. Whispers, cries, echoes of lives that used to be. How do you survive when the world turns into a freezer? What do you do when fire isn't just a tool, but a lifeline? Some people have found answers, others, not so much. In the early days, there was hope, a belief that help was coming, that governments, scientists, someone would figure out a way to fix this. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and that hope froze alongside everything else. I remember the first time I realized just how bad it was. A neighbor of mine, sweet woman, always baked cookies for the block, froze to death in her living room. She had a fire going too. It just wasn't enough. I'll never forget the look on her face. Not fear, not pain, just stillness, like she'd become part of the ice. And yet, here we are. Some of us, at least. We've adapted. If you can call burning furniture for warmth and rationing crackers adapting. It's amazing, really, what people will do to survive. I've heard stories of families digging tunnels into the snow to escape the wind, of groups barricading themselves in supermarkets and living off canned soup. There's even a rumor about a guy who built a makeshift flamethrower to keep warm. Desperate times, desperate measures. But for every story of ingenuity, there's a dozen of tragedy. People freezing in their cars, in their beds, on the streets. Hospitals overwhelmed with frostbite cases, then abandoned when the power went out. Entire towns vanishing overnight, their residents buried under snowdrifts so deep you'd never know they were there. And let's not forget the animals. They're suffering too. I saw a bird the other day, frozen mid-flight. It hit the ground like a glass ornament, shattering on impact. I didn't even know that was possible. Forests have turned into icy wastelands, rivers into frozen highways. The natural world isn't built for this any more than we are. Sometimes I wonder how long this can go on. Days, months, years. The scientists, what few are still broadcasting, say the nuclear winter could last decades. Maybe longer. They talk about atmospheric particulates and solar radiation and All these other words that mean nothing when your fingers are too numb to turn the dial on your radio. What it boils down to is this: we're in it for the long haul, or the short one, depending on your luck. Speaking of luck, if you're in a region that still has some semblance of government, count your blessings. I've heard that some countries are setting up relief zones, distributing supplies, even building underground shelters. Of course, that's assuming you can get to one, and that they'll let you in. Resources are scarce, and not everyone makes the cut. It's a cold world in every sense of the word. For those of us on the outside, it's a different story. We make do with what we have or we don't. Simple as that. I know a guy, used to be an investment banker of all things, who traded his Rolex for a can of beans. Says it was the best deal he ever made. Another guy offered me a gold bar for a pack of matches. I turned him down. What good is gold when you're freezing to death? And yet, amidst all this despair, there are moments, small, fleeting moments, that remind me why we keep going. A child laughing as they slide down a snowbank. A couple huddled together, sharing the warmth of a single candle. A stranger offering you half of their last ration, even when they don't have enough for themselves. Humanity is stubborn, resilient, stupid sometimes, but we don't give up easily. We find ways to endure, to adapt, to survive. Maybe that's our greatest strength. Or maybe it's our curse. If you're still listening, and I hope you are, know this: you're not alone. Somewhere out there in this frozen wasteland, there are others like you. People who are fighting, struggling, hoping. People who refuse to let the cold win. And as long as you're listening, I'll keep talking. I'll keep telling the stories, sharing the news, and reminding you that even in the darkest, coldest times, there's still a flicker of light, a spark, a chance. So light a fire, if not for warmth, then for hope. And if you can't do that, then just keep moving. One step, one breath, one moment at a time, because sometimes that's all it takes to survive. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay human. The sky's been a permanent shade of gray for weeks now, and the clock stopped mattering the moment the world froze over. If you're tuning in, this is Radio Frostbite, your last connection to whatever's left of civilization. Let's take a trip back to the days when it all began, shall we? The first few moments, the first few mistakes, the first signs of collapse. It started slowly, almost too slowly. The nuclear explosions were catastrophic, yes, but we'd prepared for that. Emergency protocols were triggered. People huddled in basements, bunkers, subway stations. We knew how to survive the blast. What we didn't account for was the aftermath. The sky, thick with ash, turned the sun into a pale memory. The temperature plummeted faster than anyone thought possible. First, it was an unseasonably cold day. Then it was colder still, and then colder yet. Within hours, the air itself felt hostile. You could feel it in your bones, in your lungs, in your teeth. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill you, it invades you. And then there was the hunger. Food supplies dwindled faster than anyone anticipated. Panic buying, looting, and sheer desperation cleared the shelves in record time. Perishables were the first to go. Milk froze solid, vegetables turned to ice, and meat, well, let's just say freezers became obsolete overnight. People fought over canned goods, boxed pasta, anything that could be eaten without needing to be thawed. But hunger was just the beginning. The elderly and the vulnerable were the first to go. I remember hearing stories, terrifying, heart-wrenching stories. A grandmother in Russia who froze to death sitting in her armchair because the power had gone out and she couldn't light the fireplace. A family in Canada found in their home, huddled together under layers of blankets, as though they thought warmth could be conjured from love alone. Scientists scrambled to understand the scope of what was happening. Governments scrambled to respond. Both failed. You've probably heard the broadcast, the ones from those early days. They tried to sound confident, reassuring. "This is a temporary weather anomaly," they said. "We're working on a solution." But you could hear it in their voices, couldn't you? The cracks, the tremors. They didn't know what to do. In the colder regions of the world, the collapse was almost immediate. Scandinavia, Russia, Canada, places that prided themselves on their ability to endure harsh winters, became uninhabitable within days. Ice crystals formed inside homes, creeping up walls like delicate, deadly veins. Cars wouldn't start, water pipes burst, and the very air felt sharp, like breathing in shards of glass. People fled south in droves, but where could they go? The roads were frozen, the skies were grounded, and the sea was turning to slush. I heard a story from someone in Norway, a fisherman. He said the fjords froze over so quickly that his boat was trapped, mid-journey. He and his crew tried to trek back on foot, but the snow was so deep, the air so cold, they didn't make it. He was the only survivor, and even he barely lived to tell the tale. And then there was the silence. It crept in like a thief, unnoticed at first, but soon impossible to ignore. Cities, once alive with the sounds of daily life, traffic, chatter, music, fell quiet. The hum of electricity, the distant roar of airplanes, even the barking of dogs, all of it disappeared. The world went still as though it was holding its breath. But silence, like the cold, isn't empty. It's full of whispers, of memories, of things you wish you could forget. I'll never forget the sound of that first storm. The wind howled like a living thing, tearing through the streets, rattling windows, burying everything in its path. It was relentless, unforgiving. And when it finally stopped, the world it left behind was unrecognizable. The governments tried to maintain order, they issued decrees, opened shelters, distributed rations, but it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. People fought over scraps, over space, over survival. I heard about a shelter in Moscow where they had to lock the doors because they couldn't take in any more people. The crowd outside froze to death, their bodies piled up against the entrance like some grotesque monument to desperation. And yet, even in the face of such despair, there were moments of humanity. Small, fleeting, but real. A man in Canada who shared his last can of soup with a stranger. A group of neighbors in Sweden who banded together to build a communal fire, burning furniture, books, anything that could keep them warm. Acts of kindness in a world that had grown so cold. But those moments were rare, too rare. The scientists, bless their optimistic little hearts, kept broadcasting updates. They talked about particulate matter, solar radiation, atmospheric cooling. They said it was a nuclear winter, a phenomenon they theorized but never truly understood. The planet will recover, they said. It's just a matter of time. But time is a luxury we no longer have, isn't it? I remember the day the broadcast stopped. Not all at once, but one by one, like stars winking out in a darkening sky. First the local stations, then the national ones, then the international. Now it's just us, the ones who refuse to stop talking, even when there's no one left to listen. And yet, here we are, still here, still breathing, if you can call it that. The air is so cold now, it feels like fire in your lungs. Every breath is a struggle, every step a battle. But we keep going, don't we? Because what else is there to do? Sometimes I wonder if we're all just ghosts now, clinging to the remnants of a world that no longer exists. But then I hear a voice, yours maybe, or see a light flicker in the distance and I remember that we're still alive. And as long as we're alive, there's hope. Fragile, flickering, but real. Now, let's talk about something that used to be as constant as the sunrise. Nature. The animals, the forests, the oceans, our planet's lifeblood, and how it's all unraveling. When the bombs fell, the first thought was, naturally, about us. Humanity, how we'd survive, where we'd go, what we'd eat. But it wasn't just us, was it? The fallout didn't stop at our cities. our borders, or even our homes. It seeped into every corner of the earth, rewriting the rules for every living thing. Take elephants, for example. These magnificent giants, creatures of the sun-drenched savannas, are not built for the cold. Reports say entire herds froze to death, their massive bodies unable to generate enough heat to fend off the relentless chill. Can you imagine creatures that once roamed with such grace, reduced to silent, lifeless monuments of a time that feels so far away now? And then there are the birds, tropical birds, with their vibrant plumage and songs that once painted the air with joy, have all but disappeared. Their delicate systems weren't made for this kind of cold. They dropped from the skies in waves, their lifeless bodies scattered across frozen ground. The skies are empty now, devoid of the flocks that once danced on the wind. Polar bears, ironically, fared no better. You'd think they'd thrive in a frozen world, but even they've been pushed to their limits. The ice that's spreading isn't the kind they're used to. It's too brittle, too unstable. Their hunting grounds have turned into death traps, and with the oceans beneath freezing into an impenetrable slush, their prey has all but vanished. And speaking of oceans, do you remember the sound of the waves? That rhythmic crashing, the eternal heartbeat of the planet? That sound is gone now. The seas have turned into fields of ice, vast and silent. Ships are trapped in frozen ports. Fish lie suspended in mid-swim. And coral reefs, those underwater cities of life, are now barren, colorless graveyards. The forests haven't fared much better. Once they stood as symbols of endurance and strength, their roots deep, their canopies wide. Now, they're nothing but brittle skeletons. The trees snap under the weight of snow and ice. Their once green leaves long since turned to dust. The whispers of the wind through the branches have been replaced by an eerie stillness, as if even nature itself has lost its voice. I heard a story the other day about a tiger. One of the last, they said. It had been rescued from the wild and taken to what was left of a zoo. But this wasn't a zoo anymore, not in the traditional sense. No tourists, no children pressing their faces to the glass. Just scientists, desperately trying to save what they could. The tiger was kept in a cryogenic chamber, its body suspended in a state between life and death, waiting for a world that might never be warm enough to wake it again. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine a world where the last remnants of nature exist not in the wild, but in freezers, where the vibrant colors of a macaw or the striking stripes of a zebra are preserved behind frosted glass, like relics in a museum of a planet that once lived and breathed. And it's not just the animals. The insects, the bacteria, the fungi, all the tiny unseen workers that keep ecosystems running are disappearing too. Without them, even the smallest cycles of life are breaking down. The soil is turning sterile, the rivers are freezing over, and the air feels wrong, heavy, as if it's mourning everything it's lost. Of course, humanity being humanity, we're trying to fix it, or at least we were. Scientists have turned zoos into cryogenic shelters, their halls filled not with visitors, but with the hum of machines. They're freezing DNA samples, embryos, entire species, in the hope that one day, somehow, they can be brought back. It's a noble effort, but it's hard not to wonder, will there even be a world left for them to return to? And then there are the seed vaults. You've heard of those, haven't you? Underground bunkers filled with the seeds of every known plant species, designed to restart agriculture in the event of a global catastrophe. Well, this is that catastrophe, and yet even these vaults aren't safe. The permafrost is shifting, the earth is cracking, and the cold is seeping in deeper than anyone anticipated. Some vaults have already been lost, their contents frozen beyond recovery. Imagine it, a world without chirping birds, without lush forests, without the hum of bees or the rustle of leaves, A world where nature itself is on life support, kept alive by machines and human desperation. It's not just heartbreaking, it's terrifying. Because without nature, what are we? What is this planet? If not a living, breathing organism, now reduced to a frozen husk. I remember a time when the world felt alive, when you could walk through a forest and feel the pulse of the earth beneath your feet, when you could look up at the sky and see birds soaring, hear their songs, when the oceans teemed with life, the forests with sound, and the air with a kind of magic that made you believe in something greater than yourself. Now all that's left is silence, a silence so profound it feels like the planet itself is holding its breath, waiting for the end. But here's the thing about silence. It doesn't last forever. Even now, there are whispers. Whispers of hope, of resilience, of life finding a way. Somewhere deep beneath the ice, there are seeds waiting to sprout, creatures adapting in ways we can't yet understand. Nature, after all, has a way of surviving. It's been through mass extinctions before. It's seen ice ages, meteor strikes, volcanic eruptions, and every time it comes back, different but alive. The question is, will we be here to see it? Will humanity have the patience, the strength, the humility to endure alongside it? Or will we fade, like so many species before us, leaving nothing behind but footprints in the snow? As I sit here broadcasting into the void, I like to think we'll make it. That we'll find a way to coexist with this new world, even if it's one we barely recognize. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that life, no matter how fragile, no matter how fleeting, always finds a way. And maybe, just maybe, so will we. Time zones don't mean much anymore, do they? Not when the world's economy has ground to a halt. When the concept of markets feels as archaic as dinosaurs. If you're tuning in, this is Radio Frostbite, bringing you the latest, or maybe the last, broadcast about a world that's fallen apart, piece by frozen piece. It wasn't immediate. The economic collapse crept up on us, masked by the more obvious disasters, the freezing temperatures, the snowstorms, the desperate scramble for survival. But as the cold deepened, so did the cracks in the foundation of our global economy. What began as a ripple, a slight dip in stock prices, a few delayed shipments, soon became a tidal wave that swept away everything in its path. The stock markets were the first to go. Panic spread like wildfire. Though I suppose that's an ironic metaphor these days. Investors dumped their shares faster than you could say margin call, and the major indices plummeted into free fall. Banks tried to reassure people, issuing statements about temporary volatility and market resilience. But it was like shouting into a blizzard. Within days, the markets were frozen, literally and figuratively. Cryptocurrencies had their moment in the spotlight, of course. When the traditional systems began to fail, people flocked to Bitcoin, Ethereum, and whatever other coins they could get their hands on. For a brief, shining moment, the digital currencies soared. A single Bitcoin was worth more than most houses. Well, houses that weren't already encased in ice. But then the power grid started failing. Mining rigs went offline, wallets became inaccessible, and those shiny, imaginary coins turned into worthless digital artifacts. For those still hodling crypto, congratulations. You now own the most expensive collection of ones and zeros in history. Global trade, the lifeblood of the modern economy, came to a screeching halt. The ports froze over, trapping cargo ships like flies in amber. Highways became impassable, airports shut down, and supply chains disintegrated overnight. The world's factories, farms, and refineries suddenly found themselves producing goods they couldn't deliver, and demand quickly outstripped supply. And what happens when supply vanishes but demand doesn't? Chaos. That's what. The price of a loaf of bread skyrocketed to absurd heights. In some places, it was worth more than gold. A can of soup became a family's most valuable possession, guarded as fiercely as a dragon guards its treasure. Currency itself became meaningless. People traded what they had, jewelry, heirlooms, even wedding rings, for food and fuel. I heard about a man who swapped a diamond necklace for a single bag of rice. When asked if he regretted it, he just laughed. "Can't eat diamonds," he said. Markets weren't the only things collapsing. Society itself began to fracture under the weight of desperation. The divide between the haves and the have-nots became a chasm, with those at the bottom scrambling for scraps, while those at the top fortified themselves behind gated communities and private security forces. There were stories of wealthy individuals hoarding supplies, building heated bunkers, and even hiring armed guards to protect their stashes. But money only buys so much when the world itself is bankrupt. For the rest of us, survival became the only currency that mattered. Communities formed out of necessity, pooling resources and skills to create makeshift economies. Barter systems replaced cash transactions, with people trading everything from canned goods to blankets to firewood. In some places, cigarettes became the de facto currency. In others, it was alcohol. And in one particularly bleak case I heard about, it was bullets. But even amidst the chaos, there were moments of humanity, acts of kindness that reminded us of what we're capable of, even in the darkest times. I heard about a baker who continued to make bread, giving it away to anyone who needed it. "What's the point of hoarding it?" he said. "If we're all going to freeze, might as well do it on a full stomach." There was also a woman who opened her home to strangers, sharing her dwindling supplies with anyone who knocked on her door. She said it was what her mother would have wanted. And then there was the man who spent his last can of gasoline driving to a nearby town to deliver medicine to a sick child. He said it was worth it, even though he didn't have enough fuel to make it back. Still, these stories are the exception, not the rule. For most, life has become a brutal game of survival. The cold has a way of stripping away pretense, revealing who we truly are. Some rise to the occasion, helping others despite their own struggles. Others don't. I heard about a black market that sprang up in one of the major cities, a place where you could buy anything for the right price. Food, medicine, fuel, even people. Yes, people. Desperation does strange things to morality. And yet, through it all, there's a strange sort of resilience, a stubborn refusal to give up, even when the odds seem insurmountable. It's in the small things. The mother who shares her last piece of bread with her child, the stranger who offers you their coat when yours is too thin, the community that comes together to dig out a buried car, even though they know it'll never start. Economists, the few who are still around in broadcasting, say this is the end of capitalism as we know it, that the systems we built were never designed to withstand a global catastrophe on this scale. They talk about paradigm shifts and new models of sustainability, but it all feels so far removed from the reality most of us are living. When you're huddled under a pile of blankets, trying to keep your fingers from turning black with frostbite. The stock market doesn't matter much, does it? But here's the thing about collapse. It's also an opportunity, a chance to rebuild, to reimagine, to create something better. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. But maybe, just maybe, this is the reset we needed. A chance to learn from our mistakes, to build a world that values people over profits, community over competition, and survival over success. For now, though, survival is all that matters. So, if you're listening, hang on to what you have. Whether it's a can of soup, a warm blanket, or just the person sitting next to you. Because in the end, it's not about the money, or the markets, or the things we've lost. It's about the people we're still fighting for, the connections we're still making, and the hope we're still holding on to. And who knows? Maybe one day, When the world begins to thaw, we'll look back on this time not as the end, but as the beginning of something new. Until then, stay safe, stay warm, and remember, even in a world gone cold, humanity still has a spark. Now, let's talk about the people in power. The ones who were supposed to lead us, protect us, and ideally, save us. Governments around the globe have scrambled to respond to the Ice Age apocalypse, each with their own plans, priorities, and of course, flaws. The United States, always keen to project strength, was among the first to deploy its military. Soldiers were sent out in convoys to distribute food, blankets, and fuel to those in need. They navigated icy highways in armored vehicles, braving the snowstorms to reach stranded communities. The images of these operations, soldiers handing out supplies to frostbitten families, helicopters airlifting survivors from frozen suburbs, were splashed across what remained of the media. For a moment, it felt like they had it under control. But behind the scenes, the cracks were already showing. Reports started trickling in about looted supply trucks, overwhelmed distribution centers, and shelters running out of space. Within hours of opening, the government's well-laid plans couldn't keep up with the sheer scale of the crisis. And then there was the selection process for evacuation. Not everyone made the cut. Families were separated, communities torn apart. You didn't need to be a conspiracy theorist to see what was happening. Those deemed more valuable were prioritized, while the rest were left to fend for themselves. The president's addresses didn't help. Delivered from the warmth of an underground bunker, her words of solidarity rang hollow for those shivering in the cold. "We're in this together," she said, while millions watched from frozen homes, with no power and no food. Together? It certainly didn't feel that way. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, India was looking to the stars. The Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, has always been a symbol of ingenuity and ambition, but now it's become humanity's last hope for escape. Their scientists have shifted their focus to interplanetary migration, pouring resources into projects to colonize Mars or even Venus. It sounds like something out of science fiction, doesn't it? But for many, it's the only glimmer of hope in an otherwise a hopeless world. Prime Minister Aurora's speeches have taken on an almost messianic tone. "If humanity's future lies among the stars," she said in her most recent address, "then India will lead the way." Stirring words, sure, but they don't mean much to the millions of Indians living in rural areas where the cold has killed crops, frozen rivers, and turned entire villages into ghost towns. And let's not forget the obvious question. Who gets to go? Who decides? The thought of leaving Earth behind is both exhilarating and terrifying. It's a chance to start over, but only for the select few. Then there's China, ever the pragmatist. Their approach to the apocalypse is as calculated as it is chilling. They've begun constructing massive underground cities, complete with living quarters, hydroponic farms, and geothermal power plants. The idea is simple. If the surface is uninhabitable, move below it. It's a bold plan, and one that's already showing results. Early reports suggest that these subterranean havens are functional, if not comfortable. But they're not open to everyone. Entry is restricted to government officials, military personnel, and a carefully curated list of essential citizens. President Zhao's public appearances have been rare, but his most recent statement was as cold as the world outside. "Survival requires sacrifice," he said. "The needs of the many outweigh the wants of the few." Sacrifice for whom? That's the part he didn't elaborate on. The irony, of course, is that the sacrifices are never made by those giving the orders. Other nations are struggling to keep up. Smaller countries, lacking the resources of global superpowers, have been hit the hardest. Their governments are collapsing under the weight of the crisis, their leaders fleeing or disappearing altogether. The global balance of power is shifting. with alliances crumbling and rivalries reigniting. There have been reports of nations hoarding resources, of covert raids on supply depots, and even of skirmishes along frozen borders. I managed to get my hands on a leaked recording between two world leaders. It's brief, but it says everything you need to know about the state of international diplomacy right now. Prime Minister, we need access to your fuel reserves. Our people are dying. And what about my people? Are they less deserving of survival than yours? This isn't about deserving. It's about numbers. We can save more lives. At what cost? My nation's sovereignty? My people's trust? Sometimes survival doesn't leave room for trust. The line went dead after that. I don't know which leaders were involved, but the tone was unmistakable. Desperation, frustration, fear, and then there's the darker side of government response, the part they don't want us to know about. Rumors are swirling about priority lists, secret rosters of individuals deemed essential for humanity's survival. Scientists, engineers, doctors, high-ranking officials, they're being relocated to undisclosed locations, while the rest of us are left to wonder, are we on the list? Should we be? I reached out to an old contact who used to work in intelligence. His response was cryptic, but revealing. If you're asking, you're not on it, he said, and if you were, you'd already be gone. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? The idea that our worth is being calculated, weighed, and judged by people we'll never meet. That somewhere, in some fortified room, decisions are being made about who lives and who doesn't, and all we can do is wait, watch, and hope we've done enough to matter. Of course, not everyone is waiting for salvation. Communities are forming their own networks, creating their own systems of governance. Barter economies have sprung up, with people trading food, fuel, and warmth. In some places, local leaders have emerged, not politicians or military commanders, but ordinary people stepping up to do what needs to be done. But these grassroots efforts can only go so far. Without resources, without infrastructure, without support, their survival is as fragile as the ice beneath our feet. And while the governments of the world squabble over territory and trade routes, it's the ordinary people who are paying the price. So, what comes next? Will the United States' military efforts succeed in stabilizing their nation? Or will the cracks in their system grow too wide to mend? Will India's dreams of interplanetary migration become a reality? Or will they remain just that, a dream? And will China's underground cities prove to be humanity's salvation? Or will they become tombs for those trapped within? And then there's the question that haunts us all. If survival requires sacrifice, how much are we willing to give? Are we willing to leave our loved ones behind for a chance at a future? Are we willing to abandon the planet that gave us life? And perhaps most chilling of all, are we willing to accept that we might not make the cut? This is the reality we're living in, a world where survival isn't guaranteed, where every choice feels like a gamble, and where the people in power are just as lost as the rest of us. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Humanity has a way of defying the odds. We've faced extinction before. We've risen from the ashes before. And maybe, just maybe, we'll do it again. But until then, we wait and we hope. Now, let's talk about the core of what it means to be human. The will to survive. Because no matter how deep the coal cuts, no matter how bleak the horizon looks, people find ways. Ingenious, desperate, heartbreaking ways to keep going. Out there in the frozen wasteland, survival has become an art form. Families have turned their homes into fortresses against the cold. Blankets, mattresses, even curtains are tacked up against windows and doors, creating makeshift insulation. Entire rooms are abandoned to conserve heat, with everyone huddling together in a single space. Fireplaces, once decorative, are now lifelines. People burn whatever they can. Wood, furniture, old photo albums, anything that will produce warmth, even for a moment. Some have gone further. building shelters out of whatever they can find. I heard about a family in the Midwest who converted their basement into a survival bunker. They scavenged scraps of metal and wood. To reinforce the walls, rigged a ventilation system using old car parts, and even created a makeshift stove out of an oil drum. It's not pretty, but it's kept them alive. Food, of course, is another challenge. With supply chains broken and supermarkets emptied long ago, people have turned to whatever they can scavenge, hunt, or grow. A listener from Norway sent me a message last week. Here's what he had to say. We've been living on frozen fish and snow for weeks. The fishing holes freeze over as fast as we can drill them. And the snow, well, turns out snow isn't as filling as it looks. My son tried to melt a bucket of it for drinking water, but it barely made a cup. We're rationing everything, but we don't know how much longer we can last. It's a grim picture, but it's not unique. Across the world, people are stretching what little they have as far as it can go. Meals are measured in spoonfuls, shared sparingly among family members. A single can of soup might last 3 days. Bread has become a luxury, hoarded and traded like gold. And yet, even in the face of scarcity, there's generosity. Communities have sprung up, banding together for mutual aid. In some places, neighbors take turns cooking what little food they have, pooling resources to make meals that can feed everyone. A man in Poland told me about how his entire apartment building has turned into a communal survival hub. They share firewood, food, and even the heat from a single generator they managed to repair. It's not much, he said, but it's enough. But not everyone comes together. Desperation brings out the best and the worst in people. There are stories of looting, of people breaking into abandoned homes in search of supplies. In some cases, those homes weren't as abandoned as they seemed. Fights break out over food, water, even firewood. A woman from Detroit told me about a group that raided her neighborhood, taking everything they could carry and leaving destruction in their wake. They didn't care, she said. They just wanted to survive, no matter the cost. It's a delicate balance, isn't it? The line between survival and savagery, between helping your neighbor and hoarding for yourself. Some manage to walk that line with grace. Others don't. Let's talk about survival tips for a moment. Because while the situation is dire, there are still things you can do to improve your chances. If you're struggling to stay warm, try this. Create a makeshift heat source by filling metal cans with vegetable oil and a wick made from an old t-shirt or cloth. It's not a perfect solution, but it can provide enough heat to take the edge off. For food, look to the land. What's left of it? Root vegetables like potatoes and carrots can often be found even in frozen ground, though you'll need tools to dig them up. Edible plants like dandelions and pine needles can still provide some nutrition. And if you're near a body of water, ice fishing can be a lifesaver, though you'll need to keep the holes from freezing over too quickly. If you're struggling to find clean drinking water, snow is an option. But remember, it takes a lot of snow to make even a small amount of water. Melt it slowly over a fire or stove to conserve as much heat as possible. And if you can, boil it to kill any bacteria. The last thing you need is to get sick out here. As for shelter, think small. The smaller the space, the easier it is to heat. Use whatever you have to create insulation. Clothes, blankets, even newspaper. If you're outside, snow can actually work in your favor. Digging a small snow cave can provide surprisingly good insulation, though you'll need to create a ventilation hole to prevent carbon dioxide buildup. And above all, keep moving. Even small amounts of activity can help generate body heat. Sitting still for too long is a fast track to hypothermia. But don't overdo it. Exhaustion is just as dangerous as the cold. Now, let's return to the stories, because survival isn't just about the practical. It's about the emotional, the human, the connections that keep us going when everything else has fallen apart. I received a message from a listener in Argentina. He's been traveling with a group of strangers he met after his car broke down on a frozen highway. They've been walking together for weeks, scavenging what they can and sharing everything equally. He wrote, I don't even know their last names, but they're my family now. We argue, we laugh, we cry. They've saved my life more times than I can count. Another story came from a teenager in Japan who found an old radio in her grandparents' attic. She rigged it to a car battery and managed to tune into this broadcast. "It's strange," she said. "Hearing your voice makes me feel less alone, like there's still something out there worth holding on to." And then there was the man from Canada who sent me a picture of his dog, a scrappy little mutt named Charlie. "He's the reason I'm still here," he said. "Every time I think about giving up, he looks at me with those big, stupid eyes, and I keep going. I can't let him down." It's these stories that remind me of why we fight, why we endure. Because even in the darkest times, there's light. Even in the coldest places, there's warmth. So if you're out there listening, don't give up. Keep building, keep sharing, keep surviving. Because as long as there's life, there's hope. And as long as there's hope, we have something worth fighting for. Now, I want to talk about something we don't hear much of these days. Hope. Because in the middle of all this freezing despair, there's been a whisper, a rumor, a flicker of light breaking through the endless gray. And if what I've heard is true, that light might just be our salvation, or our undoing. Let me set the stage for you. For weeks now, the airwaves have been eerily quiet. The big players, NASA, ISRO, ESA, they've all gone silent. Their usual updates replaced by static. Most of us assumed the worst. Maybe they'd abandoned their missions, or maybe they'd abandoned us. But then, 2 nights ago, I picked up a signal. Faint, garbled, buried, under layers of interference, but unmistakable. It was ISRO. The voice was shaky, the words clipped, but the message was clear. They've made a breakthrough. After months of desperate research, ISRO has declared that Mars, and possibly even Venus, may be viable options for human habitation. They've developed what they're calling a habitat pod, a self-contained living system capable of supporting human life in the harsh conditions of space and beyond. Testing is complete. Deployment is imminent. Humanity's future lies among the stars, the voice said. We have the technology. We have the will. Now we must act. It's the kind of announcement that should fill you with hope, isn't it? The idea that we might escape this frozen wasteland, that we might find a second chance on a new world. But here's the catch. The pods are limited. Only a few hundred can be sent in the first wave. And just like every other lifeboat in history, there aren't enough seats for everyone. I've been trying to piece together more details, who's on the list, how they're choosing. But so far, all I've got are whispers. Scientists, engineers, medical personnel, they're obvious picks. But beyond that, is it random? Is it merit-based? Is it rigged? No one seems to know, and the silence from ISRO isn't helping. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, NASA has been working on something equally ambitious. They've identified geothermal hotspots, areas where the Earth's internal heat still burns strong, even beneath the ice. Their plan? To drill deep, harness that heat, and create self-sustaining energy hubs. If it works, these hubs could support small colonies, offering a lifeline to those who can't or won't leave the planet. But here's the thing. The drilling is risky, very risky. The equipment is experimental. The conditions are brutal, and the timeline is impossibly tight. If they fail, it won't just be a loss of resources. It could trigger further instability, making an already uninhabitable planet even worse. And then there's the moral question. Do we pour our remaining resources into saving Earth, or do we cut our losses and focus on escaping it? Do we fight for the planet we've called home for millennia, or do we risk everything for a one-way ticket to the stars? And now I have breaking news. Just moments ago, I intercepted another signal. This time, it's NASA. They've begun their first geothermal drilling operation in Yellowstone. Yes, Yellowstone, the supervolcano. The plan is to tap into its immense heat, converting it into a sustainable energy source. The countdown you're hearing? That's the final preparation phase. They're going live within the hour. The stakes couldn't be higher. If this works, it could pave the way for similar operations around the globe. But if it doesn't, well, you've seen what happens when we meddle with forces we don't fully understand. Let's just say a volcanic eruption in the middle of an ice age isn't anyone's idea of a good time. Meanwhile, back in India, preparations for the first wave of Mars-bound pods are underway. I've heard reports of people camping outside ISRO facilities, begging for a chance to be included. One man reportedly offered his life savings, everything he had, for a single seat. A woman in Bangalore was arrested after attempting to break into the facility, claiming she had vital information that could ensure the mission's success. Desperation, it seems, knows no bounds. But amidst the chaos, there are also moments of unity. In Mumbai, a group of school children painted murals on the walls outside an ISRO office. Their artwork depicts rockets soaring into the stars, leaving behind a frozen Earth. One of the children was interviewed, and when asked why she painted a rocket, she simply said, "Because it means we don't give up." It's a sentiment that's echoed across the world. Despite everything, the cold, the hunger, the fear, people are holding on to hope. Maybe it's misplaced, maybe it's foolish, but it's there. And there it is, that sound you're hearing. That's the team at NASA celebrating a successful drill site activation. The geothermal operation is live. Heat is flowing. Energy is being generated. It's a small victory, but in a world like this, even small victories feel monumental. But let's not forget the bigger picture. These are just the first steps. The drilling is far from finished, and the Mars mission is still months, if not years, away from full deployment. And even if these efforts succeed, they're not solutions. They're lifelines. Temporary fixes for a problem that's far too big for any single country, any single project to solve. And then there's the question we can't avoid. Who decides? Who gets to go to Mars? Who gets access to the geothermal hubs? Who gets to live? And who gets left behind? These aren't just logistical questions. They're existential ones. And the answers, I fear, will reveal more about us than we're ready to confront. So, survivors, here's my question for you. If you had the choice, what would you do? Would you risk everything for a one-way ticket to another planet, leaving behind everything and everyone you've ever known? Or would you stay, fighting for a chance to rebuild, on a planet that seems determined to destroy us? There's no right answer, just choices. Hard, impossible choices. And for now, all we can do is wait and see where those choices take us. Now, as the world outside remains cloaked in ice and silence, let's take a moment to reflect, not just on where we've been, but on where we're going. In the endless cold, amidst all the uncertainty, what keeps us going? What lessons have we learned from this frozen chapter of our history? It's no secret how we got here. We pushed our planet too far, too fast. For decades, we ignored the warnings, the melting ice caps, the burning forests, the polluted skies. We built our lives on the illusion of endless resources, endless time. We told ourselves that technology would save us, that someone else would fix it, that the consequences wouldn't come in our lifetimes. And then they did. The world didn't end in a single moment. It unraveled slowly at first, then all at once. The nuclear flash that set the stage for this ice age was just the tipping point. The truth is, the cracks were already there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the slightest push. And when the push came, everything crumbled. Now, we're living in the aftermath, a world where fire is a luxury, where food is more valuable than gold, where survival is the only goal. It's a grim reality, no doubt. But amidst the cold and chaos, there's something else. A spark, a flicker, a quiet resilience that refuses to be snuffed out. That's the thing about humanity, isn't it? We're relentless, resilient, stubborn to a fault. No matter how many times we fall, we get back up. No matter how bleak the odds, we keep fighting. It's both our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. And in times like these, it's all we've got. I've seen it in the stories you've shared. The baker giving away bread to strangers, the neighbors pooling their resources, the parents sacrificing everything for their children. Even in the face of unimaginable loss, people find ways to be kind, to be generous, to be human. It's those small acts that remind me there's still something worth saving in this world. But it's not just kindness that keeps us going. It's hope. Fragile, flickering, but unyielding hope. Hope that we'll find a way out of this. Hope that the drilling in Yellowstone will spark a new beginning. Hope that the rockets to Mars will carry the seeds of a future we can't yet imagine. Hope that somehow we'll survive this and become better for it. And maybe that's the real lesson of this ice age. Not just that we need to take better care of our planet, though we do, but that we need to take better care of each other. Because when the storms hit, when the lights go out, when the world turns cold, it's not money or power or technology that saves us. It's people, it's community, it's love. I know it's hard to believe right now. I know the days feel endless, the nights unbearable, the future uncertain. But if you're listening to this, you've already achieved something incredible. You've survived. Against all odds, you've made it through another day in the freezer. Let me share a story I received from a listener just yesterday. It came from a young girl in Brazil. She wrote about how her family has been living in a makeshift shelter made of salvaged metal and wood. They built it together, working through the nights, their fingers numb from the cold. She said, "We don't have much, but we have each other. My dad tells me stories every night, even when he's tired, even when he's hungry. He says stories are what keep the darkness away. Stories, connections, that's what keeps us human. That's what keeps the darkness at bay." Another story came from a man in Alaska. He's been traveling alone for weeks, surviving on what little he can find. He wrote, "I thought I was the last person alive until I heard your broadcast. It's strange how just hearing another voice can make you feel less alone. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not a ghost." And then there's the couple from Germany who shared their last loaf of bread with a group of strangers they found sheltering in an abandoned train station. "We could have kept it for ourselves," they said, "but what's the point of surviving if we lose our humanity?" These stories, these moments of kindness and resilience, are what give me hope. Hope that even in the darkest times, we can still find light. Hope that even in the coldest places, we can still find warmth. Hope that together, we can survive this. I know some of you are tired. I know some of you are scared. I know some of you are wondering if it's even worth it. Let me tell you something. It is. Every breath you take, every step you make, every act of kindness you offer, it all matters. It all adds up. It all keeps the spark alive. So, survivors, here's my final thought for the night. Hold on to that light. Protect it, nurture it, share it with others. Because as long as there's even a single spark, there's a chance for a flame. And as long as there's a flame, there's a chance for warmth. And as long as there's warmth, there's a chance for life. And if you think you're alone in this, you're not. I'm here. We're here. And as long as we're here, there's hope. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've survived another day in the freezer. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Every single one of you. Before I go, let me ask you for something. If this broadcast gave you even a glimmer of hope, if it made you feel a little less alone, then please like and share it. Your support helps us keep going, helps us reach more people who need a little light in their darkness. If you have any suggestions or feedback, drop a comment and let us know. Your voice matters, and we're here to listen. We're bringing you new broadcasts every day, so don't forget to subscribe. Together, we'll keep this spark alive. I'll see you tomorrow with another broadcast. Until then, stay warm, stay safe, and remember, you're not alone.